Hey guys, how's it going? It's Danconia here, and welcome back to the Overwatch League Roundup. Playins results. What a weekend! The release of Classic WoW is in full swing. We have had the finals of Contenders Career. Congratulations to Runaway for being back on top in Career once more. Note, I will have a series coming up ahead of the Gauntlet, which is going to find the best Tier 2 Overwatch team in the world out of all the Contenders regions, so hit that sub button so you don't miss that one. But, most importantly, we have found the two teams who will take the last two spots at the Overwatch League 2019 playoffs. We came into this weekend with 6 teams in contention: the London Spitfires, Seoul Dynasty, Guangzhou Charge, Shanghai Dragons, Philadelphia Fusion, and the Chengdu Hunters. We have seen some incredible Overwatch from these teams this weekend, but who came out on top? Without further delay, let's get into the games that we saw this weekend. We started off with the first quarterfinal between the Guangzhou Charge and the Chengdu Hunters, our 9th seed versus our 12th seed. And unfortunately for the Hunters, this showed. Chengdu do the thing that Chengdu do well, and that is running stuff that is not quite meta right now. Ameng stuck to most of the time to his Wrecking Ball pick, with Elsa playing the Diva, leading the Hunters most of the time into dive-heavy comps. This led to the Hunters being 0-2 down at half-time against the Charge, who were pretty much running the new meta the whole time, which is Orisa, Sigma, Pharah and Doomfist. After the first half though, Chengdu showed us a different look, with them finally picking up the Orisa Sigma tank line, but running the Symmetra and a Pharah or a Doomfist. This did prove somewhat fruitful with a win on Horizon, but as the game went on, the Charge just looked like they had that bit more quality to their play, which allowed them to see out a 4-1 win over the Hunters. Much for the Hunters to build on though for next season, as they have exceeded expectations and should be pleased with their performance over this year. The Charge proceed to take on the Seoul Dynasty in the semi-finals. Before that though, we have another quarter-final to take a look at, between the Shanghai Dragons and the Philadelphia Fusion. This match had almost everything you could ask for. The swing of power in the match going from one way to another, technical difficulties, we went to King's Row twice because of those technical difficulties, and in all, 7 maps to decide who would join Guangzhou in the semi-finals. We saw once again a lot of Orisa and Sigma, but it was the DPS lineups where these teams really differed. Shanghai were fairly flexible, running a very meta-dominated Doomfist right now, but they would often change up what they would be running with that Doomfist. We saw Symmetra, we saw Widow, and we saw McCree from the Dragons, which was really asking questions of the Fusion. Philadelphia, however, were very stubborn early on, sticking to the DPS lineups we were seeing in Stage 4, mainly comprised of the Reaper and the Mei. This meant the Fusion were lacking against the Dragons early on, and found themselves 2-0 down at the break. After the break, the Fusion managed to make their so-called GOATS 2.0 comp work with a draw on King's Row 1st edition, and a win on Gibraltar, bringing them back into the match. So it was time for Shanghai to switch things up. Out goes the young Jin Doomfist, in comes the Ding Pharah, and we should all know how good he is on that hero. DM continues to switch things up, running McCree, Widow, Doomfist and Symmetra, but it's the Pharah in the sky that the Fusion struggled to deal with when running their favoured Mei Reaper comp. With Shanghai on match point needing only one more win to go through to the semi-finals, technical difficulties hit the game. With Numbani being taken out of the map pool due to an issue, the Fusion were allowed to pick a map that had already been played. Hence, we get King's Row 2.0. Earlier this map was very close, but ultimately was a win for Shanghai. But this time they decided to go back to the McCree and Doomfist they were running earlier, and not the Pharah that they had been having success with. This gave the Fusion a glimmer of hope, which they grasped with both hands, sealing out a 3-1 win on the second iteration of King's Row, taking us to a map 7. We go to Dorado to decide whether we would be going further, or whether the Dragons would seal the win. For this map, the Dragons sub out DM and bring Ding back in. This means that the Dragons began running what we believe the meta is right now for DPS, Doomfist and Pharah. Fascinatingly, the Fusion change up as well, with EQO running the Pharah and Carpe running the McCree. This map was really, really close, but ultimately Shanghai had just a bit more in the tank and get the win over the Fusion 4-2 in the end. The Fusion were by no means outclassed in this match, but ultimately I think that the Dragons were a bit more flexible and adjusted a bit better to the new meta compared to the Fusion. I have no doubt the Fusion will come back stronger next season, and I can't wait to see what they will do in the new format. So, we move on to the semi-finals then. And if you thought the Dragons versus the Fusion match was good, just wait till we go through the next one. Obviously, we have not seen two of the teams in the competition yet, them being the London Spitfire and the Seoul Dynasty. This is because of their higher seeding in the final season standings, they got a bye into the semi-finals of the Playins. Due to the London Spitfire having the higher seeding of 7th, they would go up against the lowest remaining seed in the competition. This would be the Shanghai Dragons. The question is, what would we see from our reigning champions? They did not look all that convincing in Stage 4, missing out on a top 6 spot that they could easily have got. The Shanghai Dragons did look bad in Stage 4, but against the Fusion they looked to have adjusted to the meta very well, and could cause the Spitfire some problems, but ultimately London did come into this game as favourites. The start for the Spitfire is very interesting. They show us something very different to what we have been seeing so far. Every team so far had been putting their off-tank player on the Sigma, but London roll out with their main tank Gesture on the Sigma, and Fletch Fury over to the Orisa. A very interesting look from the Spitfire alongside Birdwing on the Doomfist and Prophet flexing on the Reaper and the Pharah. This proved incredibly successful in the first half of the match for the Spitfire, with the Dragons unable to find any answers to it, meaning London were 2-0 at the break and the Dragons were yet to even have a point on the board. It was all looking very one-sided. After the half though, Shanghai bring in the changes. A welcome back to Ding and the Pharah pick meant trouble for the Spitfire on Hanamura. With them now unable to find an answer to the Dragons' Pharah, the Spitfire have a decent defense but a dismal attack phase which saw them full held by Shanghai. Next we went to a less Pharah-centric map in Gibraltar. This is where London had the opportunity to strike back. We see pirate ship from both teams in the extra attack rounds, and to be quite honest, I don't know whether I've ever seen pirate ship from London, so this was something new. This map had everything, all the way to a nail-biting 1v1 finish between Quatermain on Lucio and Izayaki on Ana to decide where the payload would stop for Shanghai's second attack round. Ultimately, the London Spitfire win Gibraltar, but it couldn't have been any closer. 3-1 to the Spitfire at this stage, but we are nowhere near finished. Shanghai take the game to Lijiang, which was surprising in some respects considering the Spitfire's terrible record on Ilios. But this pays dividends for the Dragons as they can go back to their favoured Doomfist and Pharah comp. And although the Spitfire match the comp, they cannot match the skill of having two players who specialise on their heroes compared to the more flexible DPS that the Spitfire have. This means the pendulum in the match swings in favour of the Dragons as they get the win on Lijiang, and the momentum is certainly with them at this point. Map 6, and we go to King's Row. Remember, at this stage the Spitfire only need one more map, whereas the Dragons must win the rest of the maps to get through to the playoffs. This is where things switch up again, with Spitfire going back to an Oink and Yoink comp on defence, including the Mei and the Hanzo, whereas Dragons stick to their guns of the Pharah and the Doomfist. London also go back to running a lot of dive on their attack rounds. We also see some dive from the Dragons as well. It's like going back in time. But it was London constantly changing things up to try and find an answer to the Pharah who was ripping them apart. Ultimately, they found some success at the end of King's Row, going back to Orisa and Sigma, but with Birdwing on the McCree. In the end, King's Row ended as a draw, meaning we really were going to go the distance if Shanghai were going to win this one. Map 7, Dorado, and London start to run more and more of the McCree. The thing is it's not producing the goods like they need it to. Ding is getting lots of value in the skies, while Youngjin is getting a lot of picks on the Doomfist, and London is struggling to get a foothold. With a lack of answers to what the Shanghai Dragons were doing, London end up losing Dorado in pretty comprehensive fashion, meaning we would go to a map 8. Yes, a gosh darn map 8. For the first time in Overwatch League history, a game had gone to a map 8, and that map would be Ilios, the last remaining control map in the pool, believe it or not. And arguably, London's worst map all season. Things at this point were looking very bad for the reigning champions, and the question was, would we really see both of last year's finalists not make it to this year's playoffs? At this point, it was pretty inevitable what the Shanghai Dragons were going to run, Pharah and Doomfist. But would London be able to find an answer, because if not, they will be going out at the first hurdle. London lose the first map of control on Well, but it was fairly close with them losing the map 100 to 99. However, they were starting to find ways to deal with Ding's Farah. On Ruins, the Spitfire managed to fight back, but again it's 100 to 99, extremely close, meaning it all came down to one last round on Lighthouse. This is where ultimately the Dragons ran out of steam, and the Spitfire found that little bit extra, that bit of clutch that they had not had for a while now, to see them get a 100 to 39 victory on Lighthouse and get themselves a 4-3 victory in the series and a spot in the 2019 playoffs. This was honestly one of the closest and most dramatic matches of Overwatch I have ever seen. Over 3 hours of play and the first game to have ever gone to 8 maps in the Overwatch League. If there is any match to go back and watch from this week, this would be the one. This one will go down in the history books. On another day, I think the Dragons would have gone through and they would deserve to be in that top 8. But ultimately, it is London who will get the chance to defend their title next week, as they will take on the NYXL, which should be a blockbuster of a match. This brings us to our last series of the week. A straight tussle between the Seoul Dynasty and the Guangzhou Charge for the last remaining playoff place. I was expecting this to be very close, and the theme of the week is that even if the scoreline doesn't demonstrate it, if you look at the maps, most of the time they are very close. This is another game where one team found themselves at 2-0 at half-time. This time it will be the Seoul Dynasty, and one thing is for certain. Seoul had come into this very well prepared, and Fletter had been grinding his McCree to try and deal with this impending Pharaoh meta. It was Guangzhou who would have to find some sort of answer after the halftime, but they do manage to stem the bleeding with a 5-5 draw on Horizon. Isn't that just typical of that map? But they managed to eke out a 3-2 win on Rialto, meaning that Guangzhou had firmly brought themselves back into the match as we headed into another break. The problem is, the break came at exactly the wrong time for the Charge. The break gave to Dynasty a chance to regroup and try to recompose to try and win the match. Seoul go to Lijiang and play the Doomfist and McCree or Reaper, and once again they find a lot of success and they manage to take the 2-0 victory on Lijiang, putting them on match point. This meant that the Charge would need to win the next map to stay in the match. The next map would be Eichenwald, a good Pharah map, but unfortunately the ability to use Pharah for the Charge had been extremely limited due to how impactful Fletter's McCree has been. Seoul continued to force Guangzhou to play the Doomfist and Reaper. This is a problem for the Charge, as it is Seoul who had looked a better team on this comp as a whole. But unfortunately, the constant threat of the McCree from Fletter forced the hand of the Charge, meaning that they could not play what they were most comfortable on. This gave Seoul a lot of control when it came to the latter half of the game, and ultimately allowed them to see out a 4-3 win on Eichenwald and take the series 4-1. Despite the scoreline, this match was nowhere near as one-sided as it would seem, and Guangzhou did very well, and things looked promising for them going into next season. Seoul Dynasty, on the other hand, looked very good, and this was a level of preparation for an opponent that I hadn't seen from the Dynasty before. If they can continue to find unique ways of shutting down the strengths of their opponents, they could really make waves in the playoffs. But their first game will be against the Vancouver Titans, so they will really have to turn up if they want to get a result there. But you have to be in it to win it, and they have passed the first hurdle. So that is it. We have seen some of the best Overwatch we have ever seen this week. Some fantastic series that have really gone the distance. It is the 7th and 8th seeds of the London Spitfire and the Seoul Dynasty who will be taking the remaining 2 spots in the playoffs, meaning an end-of-season playoff berth for the Seoul Dynasty, who missed out last season, and a chance for the reigning champions London to defend their title. I will be back with a preview of the playoffs as the top 6 enter the knockout phase, but the playoffs will work slightly differently compared to the play-ins, as the playoffs are part of a double elimination bracket. Yes, if you lose in the playoffs, you get another chance, but that is for another video. For now, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I will see you in the next video. See you then.